We finished with gender mainstreaming yesterday. Kada? Next, gender-based budgeting. Gender-based budgeting. Pen tap pen. Gender-based budgeting is a method of planning, programming and budgeting. 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 That contributes for the advancement of gender equality. That contributes to the advancement of gender equality and fulfillment of women's rights. And fulfillment of women's rights. Fulfillment of women's rights. It involves identifying and addressing gender gaps. It involves identifying and addressing gender gaps in sectors, government policies, plans and budgeting. Plans and budgeting. Its main purpose is to ensure that the benefits of development should reach women. Is to ensure that the benefits of development should reach women as much as men. As much as men. Gender-based budgeting was introduced in India in 2005. It's all important. Gender-based budgeting was introduced in India. Please underline in 2005. Very, very important. Okay, and remember, gender-based budgeting is also called gender-responsive budgeting. Both are same. Gender-based budgeting is also called gender-responsive budgeting. Gender-based budgeting is also called gender-responsive budgeting. Next, gender gap. Gender gap. Next point, gender gap. Write down. Gender gap is the difference in men and women. Gender gap is the difference in men and women. Difference in men and women as reflected in social, economic, political, legal and intellectual spheres. Social, political, economic, legal and intellectual spheres. Spheres of life. Spheres of life. Next, feminism. Feminism. Feminism is an ideology defined by two basic beliefs. Feminism is an ideology defined by two basic beliefs. Is an ideology defined by two basic beliefs. Basic beliefs. Write down the first one, write it in points. Women are disadvantaged because women are disadvantaged because women are disadvantaged because of their sex, of their sex, of their sex, and this can be and should be overthrown, and this can be and should be overthrown, can be and should be overthrown. Overthrown. And the second point, this refers to a mode of thought. This refers to a mode of thought that is concerned with the condition of women, that is concerned with the condition of women, condition of women in the society, the causes in the society, comma, the causes of their suffering, the causes of their suffering, comma, deprivation and measures, deprivation and measures for restoring their due position, with a fair share in prestige, power and wealth, with a fair share in prestige, power and wealth. And the stereotyping. Next, stereotyping. Take down. Is a widely held essential belief about a particular social group, such as women, caste and so on. Misogyny, last term. Misogyny, dislike, hatred, aversion, 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 or prejudice against women, expressed prejudice against women, expressed through words and actions, And with this we finish this topic. The next topic is status of women in India. Now please look at this slide. This first question is, why should we discuss status of women in India from ancient, medieval and modern perspective? The reason is because all problems related to women evolved over a period of time. Over a period of time. అంటే ఏమైందంటే, see, as we pass through ancient, medieval, modern periods till date, we see a lot of changes in our society, in the way we live our lives. As society changed, as our way of life changed, problems of women also have undergone changes. Where did the problems of women evolve? For example, when we talk about until 1970s and 80s, sati was very prevalent in India, but today we barely hear about the practice of sati, because our lifestyle, our way of looking at things have changed drastically, correct? So where did this problem of sati actually come into existence? Where did child marriages come into existence? Why is it that only in a few places you have child marriages and other places you don't have child marriages in India? Is it true that child marriages is not uniform in India? There are certain regions where you have child marriages are very prevalent. There are certain regions where you will not find child marriages. There are certain communities where you find child marriages. So why is it like this? The answer for all these questions will lie in status of women in India. అయితే మనకి ఏమైతుందంటే, ancient period I am going to discuss in three phases. One would be the IBC period, early Vedic, and the later Vedic period. Medieval period by and large was the same, so you don't have major, and the changes happen, but I can't divide it into phases. Modern period can be divided into many phases. In fact, this also we are going to divide, this also we are going to divide. But when we are discussing modern period, we are going to also include why this? Because status of women has been affected by the movements for emancipation and empowerment of women. So when we discuss this part, we are also going to discuss women's movements in India. This is the overall topic. So with this we are going to cover this. Women's movements lo chala facts untayi. You need to know the various organizations that fought for the causes of women. You should know people who contributed to the emancipation and empowerment of women. There were several movements that were led by women for women. Okay, you should know, like, you know, there is something called as something that you all are familiar with is, remember when Nirbhaya case happened, there was a massive movement against the Nirbhaya incident in Delhi. Atla manaki chaala cases untai. All those cases we are going to discuss in movements. Okay, and I'm also going to include a few cases by the Supreme Court, a few sections, a few changes in the Indian Penal Code. This part is very, very important for us. Okay, now let's begin with the ancient period. As I said, we divide the ancient period into three phases. Out of the three phases, IBC will have very less to discuss, but IBC is very significant. Endukante Indus Valley civilization, whatever we talk about IBC, we cannot say with valid proofs. Why? The script is not deciphered. So whatever we are going to talk, we are going to talk on the basis of the material evidences, correct? Now in IBC, there were two important gods who were worshipped. One was the mother goddess, and who was the second one? The proto Shiva or the Pashupati Mahadev. Okay, now out of the two main gods of IBC period, we find that mother goddess figurines were more found when compared to Pashupati Mahadev. Mother goddess figurines were found in almost all houses. All houses. Okay, because of which, therefore, it is believed that IBC was a matriarchal society. Ante the decision making was in women. Women were the head of the family. Why? Because we found a lot of mother goddess figures when compared to Pashupati Mahadev. In fact, it was almost like, you found few countable seals of Pashupati Mahadev. But Mother Goddess figure was present in almost every house of IBC. Therefore, it is concluded that it could have been a matriarchal society. From here, we move on to the early Vedic period. I am sure you know. Let me first explain it. The history lo vastadi, and in my context you need to understand this very well, because Malli caste system lo kuda this is very important. See, early Vedic period, basically the focus was on a term called Jana. Later Vedic period predominantly focused on what we call as Janapada. What is the difference between Jana and Janapada? ఎందుకు early Vedic period నుండి later Vedic period changes వస్తాయి is what I'm explaining. What changes I'll explain later. What I'm explaining right now is why was early Vedic period like this and why did it change later. అది చెప్తున్నా. Okay, now listen. Early Vedic period, as we all know, begins with migration of Aryans. Okay, Aryans firstly were basically a patriarchal community. It followed patriarchy. So with them, patriarchy entered the Indian subcontinent. However, early Vedic period, the basic focus was on here, the main source of livelihood was what do you mean by this? Grass, pastoralization is domestication of animals. Agriculture was not the main source of livelihood. Pastoralization was the main source. When I'm saying this, it means that it was a migrating society, not a settled society. Not a settled society. For their cows, they had to move from place to place in search of grass. When you are not settled as a society, the focus will never be on land. So here the focus was on meaning, people. Okay, because you were moving in groups. Why was it not a settled society? Because we just started to get civilized. We were not very familiar with agricultural techniques. Iron was not yet discovered, so it was not settled. Andikane here you will not have no rigid social rules and regulations. We did not have any major rigid social rules and regulations because we were not a settled society. Settlement tone rigidity comes. How it will come, I'll tell you. Later Vedic period kochesarki, this transition period, what happened was we started agriculture started. In fact, it evolved. We became experts in agriculture. With agriculture evolving, settlements started. What is settlements? People started settling in a particular place. Along with this, when there is agriculture, there will be surplus production. Will there be surplus production? You will not produce just to eat, but you will have more production. ఇప్పుడు ఏమవుతుందంటే when you settle, always remember, until you settle down in life, the focus will be on settling down. మీ ఇండివిజువల్గా కూడా till you get a job, till you settle down in your career, the focus will be on settling down in a career. Once you settle down, what do? Then you think of a car, then you think of a house, then you think of another house. Antena? That is where the way we individuals evolve in our life. Ikkada kuda, till we settle, we did not think of rules and regulations. But once we settle, we start thinking of rules and regulations. So settlement valla em vachistadante, you needed a leadership to exercise control. Control on what? control on two things. One was on people. The second very important was, this became more important. The third was, I'm saying there is surplus production. So don't you think somebody has to control this surplus production? So these three had to be controlled. That is the reason from people the focus shifts on the most important entity. For agriculture, the most important entity is so Janapada is nothing but Pada, territory. From people the focus shifts on territory. So ఏమైతుందంటే once they settle as a society formed. To form a society you need rules and regulations. You need somebody to make rules and enforce them. This is how they decided that the rules and regulations will be one. The second will be, now all of us can't make rules and all of us cannot enforce. That is the reason why you need to develop a superior subordinate relationship. How do you develop the superior subordinate relationship? You need to make a few people less and some people should be elevated. That is how your caste hierarchy evolved. That is how, on the basis of natural division of work. What is this natural division of work? That women give birth. They said that men should be superior and women should be inferior. To make women subordinated to men, they had to bring about certain rules and regulations. This is how things change in the later Vedic period. Am I clear with this? All of you in the class, did you understand? So because we settled in later Vedic period, we needed certain rules and regulations. We needed authority to control. To bring that authority in, they evolved this caste hierarchy. Caste hierarchy was not there in early Vedic period. It comes in later Vedic period. Similarly, they bring this difference between man and women. Out of men and women, both cannot be treated equally. In order to ensure that there is authority, they decided women to be subordinated and men to be superior. What is the reason? Because women give birth. That one biological attribute of women was taken as the basis to give supremacy to men over women. This is how it changes. Now what changes? Let's discuss that. Now what happened is, in early Vedic period, remember early Vedic period society was patriarchal. Despite being patriarchal, women treated equal to men. Why? Because there were no rigid rules and regulations. We were still focusing on settling down. Okay, now how do we know that women were treated equally to men? The first attribute here that we see is women were given access to education. When you have access to education, it automatically means we call this as post puberty, అంటే అమ్మాయి మెచ్యూర్ అయిన తర్వాత marriages. It is believed that during the Rigvedic period, I'm sure you know that early Vedic period is also called as Rigvedic period. The marriage age of marriage was 16 to 17 years. So it was post puberty marriages. When you are giving access to women to knowledge, to education, it automatically means that women are allowed to take decisions. Ante they were free to choose their life partners. Okay, there was a practice called సినిమాలలో చూసుంటాం మనం, స్వయంవర was predominantly practiced in early Vedic period. Women were given access to education. They were scholars. Women scholars were there. Gargi, Maitreyi are considered as women scholars of that period. Now, not just this, when women were allowed to get education, it automatically means that women participated in governance. How? Allowed to attend. Then governance happened through sabhas and samitis. These were the political organizations, and women were allowed to attend both sabhas and samitis. Not just this, remember that there were also women allowed to work, and very important, widow remarriages allowed. There is a practice called niyoga. There was a practice called niyoga. What is niyoga? Widow allowed to marry her dead husband's brother, younger brother or elder brother. This is called as niyoga. Niyoga was practiced. So, you know, women had freedom to take decisions. They could marry people of their choice. They were not restricted to domestic sphere. How do we know? They were allowed to participate in sabhas and samitis. Okay, and very important, they were also allowed to work. This is how it was in early Vedic period. What happens in later Vedic period? See, basically later Vedic period, I said men superior, women subordinate. I said there was a division of work. What was the basis for division of work? Basis was the biological attributes of man and women. Biological attributes, most important was that women give birth. So on this basis, the logic here was simple. Women had to give birth and nurture children. Therefore, what is the role of women in outside? Women should be restricted to what? To domestic sphere. ఆడవాళ్ళని ఇంట్లో కూర్చోబెడితే అయిపోతుంది. ఎందుకు? బికాజ్ విమెన్ విల్ డూ ఆల్ దిస్. వాట్ విల్ మెన్ డూ? మెన్ విల్ వర్క్ అండ్ ప్రొవైడ్ for family. They decided that women, the world of women will be the house and she should be only in the domestic sphere. Ippudu emaitadante, once we decide that women restricted to domestic sphere, do you think they need education? Finally, they have to cook, feed the family and bear children. So the first thing that was removed, they said, no education. Okay, no education, women restricted to domestic sphere. By this time, they started practicing caste endogamy. What is caste endogamy? Marrying within the caste, because of which they started child marriages started. They were not very widespread, but they started during the early Vedic period. Now, because there is no education, no participation in any outside activities in governance and politics. వీటిని మనం ప్రీ ప్యూబర్టీ మ్యారేజెస్ అంటాం. ఓకే, caste endogamy itself means that no power to choose life partner. Okay, the fourth important change that happened is no widow remarriages. We call this as strict monogamy. ఇవన్నీ నేను మ్యారేజ్లో ఎక్స్ప్లెయిన్ చేస్తా. strict monogamy came into existence. అంటే you are married once, you are married for a lifetime, you cannot marry again. Okay, no widow remarriages gradually became a practice. So this is how women were restricted during the later Vedic period. They were basically restricted to the domestic sphere, no education, no. Simple ga cheppalante, you should remember that anything to do with women is only within the four walls of the house. She has no business outside the house. So there is no question of working outside, there is no question of politics, nothing. No need of knowledge, because you just have to learn cooking and feeding the family. Everything else will be done by men. And in order to ensure that women don't take decisions, the most important decision of your life will be marriage, choosing your life partner. All this was controlled by the men. Indian society turned truly patriotic in the later Vedic period. This is how patriarchy established itself in the later Vedic period. Mari, what happened then? I'll just finish with medieval period, you write, and then I'll explain modern. Medieval period. Now, medieval period starts with the invasion of the Muslims, but the most important cultural development that happens during medieval period is advent of, and this also had an effect on the status of women. To put it simple, medieval period women status did not improve, it deteriorated. How did it deteriorate? I'll tell you. Can you tell me the path used by the Muslims to invade India? Physically, geographically, from where did they come? From Afghanistan to Ivala, today India. Which was the route that they frequented? Rajasthan. Did they come? Rajasthan, Gujarat. From Rajasthan they used to come down. Where are child marriages more prevalent? Rajasthan is a state in India where you have maximum number of. What is the connection between the Muslim invasion and child marriages? Now what happened is, initially the Muslims invaded India only for the wealth of the country. They plundered India. Meer avanni history lo chadutar. Along with all the wealth, you know what they did? They also carried all the unmarried girls back to their country to make them sex slaves. Okay, unmarried girls. So what is the best way to protect your girl from being carried away? So the first thing that happened is child marriages, which only were practiced till then, became compulsion. You had no choice. If you want to protect your girl, you have to get her married at the earliest. They started marrying infants. Chinna pillalu 10 nellu 11 nellu aadapillalu kuda pelli chesevaru. So child marriages became compulsion. The second thing is, see, in India, the difference between Hinduism and other religions is, Hinduism, we consider marriage as one of the ashrama dharmas. I don't know if you are aware of the 4 ashrama dharmas. We say brahmacharya, grihastha. Okay, in that we believe that marriage is a very important stage of human life. It is an essential practice in human life, and we consider marriage to be a very sacred bonding. That is the reason, you know, we ivanni nen malli marriage lo chepta, marriage is performed in front of fire and all that. Aithe in Hinduism, usually they don't allow polygamous marriages. What is polygamous marriages? having multiple partners is not allowed. It is usually they propagate monogamy, but in Islam they allow polygamy, but polygamy only for the man, not for the women. So what happened is, earlier polygamy was prevalent in rulers and noble families. Eppudu ancient period lo, it's not that we didn't have polygamy, but only kings and rich people practiced polygamy. Now what happened is, now was adopted by commoners. This further deteriorated the position of women, endukante see, polygamy led to negligence of wives and children. And remember, women were not allowed to work. The husband would neglect the wife and children. They become more vulnerable. It is second. The third thing that happened is, now imagine this is a house. Okay. ఈ ఇంట్లో earlier in early Vedic period, women were allowed to move around freely in the house. They were not allowed to come outside. Medieval period lo emaitadante, they draw a line. This is the part of the house where outsiders visit. Okay, this is the okay, this line is called as Parda system, which is an essential practice in Islam, was gradually adopted into the Hindu family, especially the upper class, upper strata of the Hindu society. Parda system valla emaitadante, further isolation of women. At least earlier, if an outsider came home, these people were allowed to interact with the outsider. Ippudu emaitundi, you are not even allowed to interact with the outsider, so you are completely isolated from the society. Idi third. The fourth thing is, we use a word called objectification of women. What is objectification and commodification? We usually use these words. What do you mean by this? Treating them like an object, basically an object of sexual pleasure. Commodification is, you treat a woman as a, where you can buy and sell a woman. Objectification and commodification of women undoubtedly increased during the medieval period. It is not that prostitution was not there in India before. It is not that Devadasi system was not there. Prostitution was there, Devadasi system was there, but they were all treated with respect. Meer ippudu enduku Vijayanagara rulers avanni chadute kuda, they had a social status. They were treated with respect. Kani ikkada emaitadante, when Islamic culture enters, there was a lot of, I don't know if you have heard of mujras and all this. Did you hear about this? Tawaif, mujra. Now this practice of tawaif led to commodification of women. The practice of objectification can be related to polygamy, treating women as objects. So these things increased in the medieval period. Medieval period, child marriages was basically because of Muslim invasions. Okay, condition further deteriorated because polygamy became prevalent amongst the commoners. Okay, Parda system was introduced, because of which there was further isolation. And the last thing was, there was a lot of, because of all these things, there was objectification and commodification of women. So medieval period, the status of women further deteriorates. Ikkada varaku raayandi, tarvata modern cheptam.